The diplomatic halls of Thessara Prime smelled like ozone and something floral that Marcus's translator software couldn't identify. He'd been on this planet for 6 weeks, and he still couldn't get used to the architecture. Everything was too tall, too angular, designed for a species that averaged a head taller than humans and had a cultural obsession with dramatic vertical space. Lieutenant Marcus Webb checked his data pad for the 15th time, confirming that yes, he was supposed to be here in this preparation chamber, reviewing protocol for tomorrow's trade negotiations. His role was simple. Stand at attention, don't speak unless spoken to, and try not to commit any cultural violations that would embarrass the human delegation. Simple in theory. In practice, Calith culture had approximately 9 million ways to accidentally insult someone, and Marcus felt like he discovered at least 3,000 of them personally. Your posture is incorrect. Marcus didn't sigh, though he wanted to. He turned to find Ambassador Lyria Et standing in the doorway, her long ears angled forward in what his cultural briefings had taught him meant focused attention. She wore the formal robes of her position, silver threading tracing patterns that indicated her family's standing in the diplomatic corps. "Ambassador," he said, attempting the formal bow he'd been practicing. 45 degrees, hands positioned just so, hold for exactly 2 seconds. 43 degrees, Lyria said, moving into the room with the fluid grace that all Calith seemed to possess. And you held the position for 1.7 seconds. Close, but insufficient for a formal setting. "I'll practice more," Marcus said through what he hoped was a diplomatically neutral smile. "See that you do. The Calith delegation will interpret improper form as disrespect." She pulled up a holographic display, gesturing at a series of notes. "I've reviewed your preparation materials for tomorrow's session. There are several issues we need to address." Of course there were. There were always issues. For the next hour, Lyria walked him through corrections to his pronunciation of Calith trade terms, adjustments to his understanding of proper gift-giving protocols, and modifications to his seating position during the negotiations. Each correction was delivered with perfect politeness and absolute certainty that she was right. She probably was right. That didn't make it any less exhausting. "The bow you performed when greeting Senior Trade Minister Krell yesterday was inappropriate," Lyria continued, pulling up a recording that made Marcus want to sink through the floor. "You used the casual variant suitable for social gatherings, not the formal variant required for ministerial interactions." "I'll make a note of that," Marcus said. "You should have made a note of it 6 weeks ago, when you received the cultural briefing materials." "I did make a note of it. There are just a lot of variations to remember." Lyria's ears tilted slightly backward, disapproval. "Your delegation requested the honor of participating in these negotiations. The minimum requirement is that you learn our basic protocols." "I'm trying." "Trying is insufficient. Either you know the protocols or you don't." She closed the holographic display with a gesture that somehow conveyed dismissal. "I've prepared additional training materials. You should review them tonight." Marcus looked at the file she transferred to his data pad. 47 pages of protocol clarifications. He'd already been awake for 20 hours. "I'll do my best," he said. "Your best should involve not embarrassing your species in front of the Calith Trade Council." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Your uniform fastening is off-center. You should correct that before tomorrow." The door slid shut behind her, and Marcus stood alone in the preparation chamber, looking down at his uniform fastening, which was, in fact, slightly off-center. "I really don't like her," he muttered to the empty room. The next 2 weeks followed the same pattern. Lyria appeared regularly with corrections, suggestions, and subtle criticisms that were always technically accurate and always delivered in a tone that made Marcus feel like he was failing an exam he hadn't known he was taking. During the formal banquet honoring the trade agreement's progress, she corrected his grip on the ceremonial glass 3 times. When he gave a brief speech thanking the Calith hosts, She provided him with a 2-page analysis of everything he'd said incorrectly. At the cultural exchange where both delegations shared information about their home worlds, she interrupted his presentation twice to clarify misleading statements about human history. Marcus tried to be professional. He reminded himself that she was brilliant at her job, that her corrections probably prevented diplomatic incidents, that cultural exchange was inherently difficult, and someone needed to maintain standards. But late at night, alone in his quarters, he imagined conversations where he told her exactly how insufferable she was being. The breaking point came 3 weeks into the negotiations, during a late-night preparation session that Marcus had thought would be private. He was reviewing materials for the final trade discussions, trying to memorize the 17 different formal phrases required for properly concluding negotiations, when Lyria arrived unannounced. "You're still here," she observed. "Preparing for tomorrow," Marcus said, not looking up from his notes. "Your pronunciation of the 7th concluding phrase is incorrect. The emphasis should be on the 2nd syllable, not the 3rd. Marcus closed his eyes and counted to 5. "I'll work on it." "You should work on all of them. Your accent makes you sound provincial." "I am provincial. I'm from a completely different planet." "That's not an excuse for poor execution." She pulled up another holographic display, this one showing his performance in various diplomatic contexts over the past 3 weeks. "Your improvement has been minimal. At this rate, you'll still be making basic errors when these negotiations conclude." "Maybe," Marcus said, his patience finally fracturing. "That's because I'm spending all my time fixing the errors you keep finding, instead of actually preparing for my actual job." Lyria's ears went rigid. "I'm helping you avoid embarrassment. You're helping yourself feel superior by pointing out everything I do wrong." "That's not. Every interaction we have, you find something to criticize. My posture, my pronunciation, my uniform, my understanding of protocols that your people took centuries to develop, and you expect me to master in 6 weeks. Marcus stood, his frustration finally overriding diplomatic caution. "Do you know what that's like, being constantly told you're insufficient?" "I am maintaining standards." "You're being exhausting." The words came out sharper than he'd intended. "You know what? You're so annoying. Everything about you is annoying. Your corrections, your superiority, your absolute certainty that you're always right. It's annoying." The silence that followed felt like it had physical weight. Lyria stared at him, her expression unreadable, her long ears completely still in a way that Marcus's cultural training told him was significant, but he couldn't remember how. Then she moved, fast. Her hand connected with his cheek in a slap that snapped his head to the side and made his eyes water. Marcus stood frozen, one hand rising to his burning cheek, his mind completely blank with shock. Lyria held his gaze for one more second, her amber eyes reflecting something Marcus couldn't identify. Then she turned and walked out of the preparation chamber with controlled, precise movements that were somehow more frightening than if she'd stormed out. The door closed. Marcus stood alone, touching his stinging cheek, and thought, "I just destroyed my diplomatic career." The summons to Ambassador Chen's office came at 600 hours, which meant Marcus had exactly 4 hours of sleep, none of it restful, to prepare for what was clearly going to be his termination. Ambassador Chen was a career diplomat with 30 years of experience and a face that had perfected the expression of deep, profound weariness. "Sit down, Lieutenant Webb," she said. Marcus sat. "Do you know what you've done?" "I insulted Ambassador Lyria," Marcus said. "I was unprofessional and disrespectful, and I'll accept whatever disciplinary action." "You triggered a dual bond." Marcus blinked. "A what?" Chen pulled up a holographic file, displaying text in both Standard and Caliph script. "A dual bond, an ancient Caliph tradition where certain exchanges, specific words of challenge combined with physical responses, constitute the opening of a formal ritual. You said," she checked her notes, "that Ambassador Lyria was annoying and that Everything about her was annoying. In Caliph culture, directly stating that someone's entire presence is irritating is considered a profound challenge to their competence and standing. I didn't mean it as a challenge. I was just frustrated. Intent doesn't matter. The words were spoken. And Ambassador Lyria responded with the gesture of acceptance, in this case, a slap. By doing so, she agreed to enter the dual bond with you. Marcus's cheek still stung. She hit me because she accepted a challenge. She acknowledged your challenge according to her culture's protocols. Now the dual bond is in motion, and it can only be resolved through completion of the ritual challenges or through formal withdrawal by one party. Then I'll withdraw. I'll apologize, explain it was a misunderstanding. Withdrawal is interpreted as cowardice. It would damage not just your standing but humanity's reputation in Caliph society. Chen leaned back in her chair. The Caliph take their rituals seriously, Lieutenant. The dual bond is how their people have traditionally resolved conflicts for centuries. Many of their most successful partnerships, political, military, personal, began with a dual bond. Partnerships. The ritual involves a series of challenges designed to test both participants' qualities. If both parties show merit, the dual bond can transform into a formal partnership, which carries significant social and political weight in Caliph culture. Marcus tried to process this. So I accidentally challenged a high-ranking Caliph diplomat to some kind of ritual combat, and now I either have to see it through or look like a coward. That's an accurate summary, yes. This is insane. This is cross-cultural diplomacy, Lieutenant. Sometimes they're the same thing. Chen studied him carefully. The question is, what do you want to do? Marcus thought about withdrawing, about apologizing and letting this whole mess fade into diplomatic awkwardness. Then he thought about the past 3 weeks, about Lyria's constant corrections and his growing resentment, and realized that maybe a ritual that forced them to actually confront their conflict wasn't the worst idea. What are the challenges? He asked. Chen smiled slightly. That's what I was hoping you'd ask. The first challenge was announced that afternoon. A test of strategic thinking, to be held in 3 days at the public arena where Caliph traditionally settled disputes. Marcus was assigned a cultural advisor, a Caliph scholar named Tavin who was approximately a century old and found the entire situation hilarious. A human in a dual bond, Tavin said, his ears tilted forward with amusement. I've lived long enough to see everything. Is this really such a big deal? Marcus asked. The dual bond is one of our oldest traditions. It's how we channel conflict into something constructive. You and Ambassador Lyria will compete in tests that reveal character, and the whole process will be public. Tavin gestured expansively. Everyone will be watching. That's not helping my stress levels. Good stress reveals truth. That's the point. Tavin pulled up information about the strategic challenge. You'll each devise a plan to achieve objectives in a complex simulation. The judges will evaluate creativity, efficiency, and elegance. Ambassador Lyria is exceptionally skilled in Caliph strategic thinking. So I'm going to lose. Losing isn't the point. Demonstrating your qualities is the point. The judges want to see who you are, not just whether you can copy our methods. Tavin's ears tilted in a way Marcus had learned meant curiosity. Why did you challenge her? I didn't mean to challenge her. I was tired and frustrated and I said something I shouldn't have. But why were you frustrated? Marcus thought about it. Because she made me feel incompetent. Every interaction she found something wrong, something I needed to fix. I couldn't ever just be good enough. And that bothered you. Of course it bothered me. Nobody likes being constantly criticized. Interesting, Tavin said. Now let me ask you something else. Why do you think she criticized you? Because I was doing things wrong. Perhaps because she was uncertain how to interact with a human and criticism was familiar territory. Perhaps because maintaining your culture's standards made her feel in control in a situation where she felt uncertain. Tavin's expression was knowing. The dual bond often reveals that the conflict we think we're having isn't the real conflict at all. Marcus spent the next 3 days preparing his strategy, working with both human advisors and Tavan to develop an approach that would demonstrate human problem-solving, without simply trying to imitate Caliph methods. The day of the challenge arrived too quickly. The public arena was smaller than Marcus had imagined, but still intimidating, with tiered seating surrounding a central platform where the simulation would be displayed for all observers. Lyria was already there, standing with perfect posture, her formal robes indicating she was taking this very seriously. They didn't speak before the challenge began. The judges, 3 senior Caliph officials, explained the scenario. A colony world with limited resources, competing factions, environmental hazards, and time pressure. Each competitor would devise a strategy, then present it for evaluation. Marcus worked through the simulation methodically, making choices that felt almost reckless by Caliph standards. He took risks, prioritized adaptability over rigid planning, used humor in his presentation to the judges. It was messy and human and probably completely wrong by Caliph metrics. When both strategies were presented, the contrast was stark. Lyria's approach was a masterpiece of efficiency, elegant, precise, devastating in its effectiveness. Every move served multiple purposes, every resource was optimized, every contingency was planned for. Marcus's strategy was chaos barely contained, but it was contained. His plan accounted for unexpected variables by building in flexibility. His humor made the presentation engaging. His willingness to accept calculated losses to secure strategic advantages showed understanding of trade-offs. The judges deliberated for what felt like hours. Finally, the senior judge spoke. Both competitors have shown merit. Ambassador Lyria demonstrated the excellence we expect from Caliph's strategic thinking. Lieutenant Webb demonstrated creativity and adaptability that offered unexpected insights. The dual bond continues. Marcus exhaled. Not a victory, but not a humiliation either. After the formal proceedings, he found Lyria in the preparation area, reviewing recordings of both strategies with an intensity that suggested she was analyzing every detail. "Hey," Marcus said. She looked up, her ears tilting slightly surprised. "Lieutenant Webb." "Marcus is fine. We're apparently in some kind of ritual combat together. Might as well use first names." The corner of her mouth twitched in what might have been almost a smile. "Lyria, then." "Your strategy was incredible," Marcus said honestly. "I felt like I was watching a master class." "Your strategy was unconventional." She paused. "Surprisingly effective in ways I hadn't anticipated." "That's probably the nicest thing you've ever said to me." "I haven't been." She stopped, seeming to choose her words carefully. "I haven't been trying to be unkind." "I know. I think I'm starting to understand that." Marcus leaned against the wall. "The constant corrections weren't about me being incompetent. They were about you trying to help me succeed in a situation where you knew I was disadvantaged." Lyria's ears tilted forward slightly. "You understand that?" "I'm learning, slowly. Turns out being challenged to ritualized combat helps clarify things." He smiled. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry I called you annoying." "You weren't entirely wrong. I am exacting. It makes me effective at my position, but it doesn't make me easy to work with." She met his eyes directly. "I didn't expect you to participate in the dual bond. Most outsiders withdraw." "I thought about it. But then I realized that maybe actually confronting us, was better than just running away from it." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of 3 more challenges hanging between them. "The next challenge is physical," Lyria said finally. "You should prepare." "I will." And Lyria, she looked at him questioningly. "Thank you for accepting the challenge, for not letting me just apologize and pretend nothing happened." Her ears tilted in that almost smile expression again. "The dual bond reveals truth, Marcus. Let's see what truth we find." As she left, Marcus touched his cheek where she'd slapped him weeks ago. The sting had faded, but the memory remained sharp. He was starting to think that maybe that sting had been exactly what he needed. The physical challenge came 2 weeks later, and Marcus spent every available hour training with human military advisors who tried to prepare him for Calith combat styles. "You don't need to win," Captain Rodriguez explained during a particularly brutal sparring session. "You need to show courage, adaptability, and respect for the tradition. Can you do that?" "I can try," Marcus said, nursing bruises that would probably look impressive tomorrow. "Trying might be enough. The Caliph aren't looking for perfection. They're looking for character." The trial took place in a different arena, this one designed for physical tests. The challenge was explained. Both competitors would navigate an obstacle course while defending against automated opponents. Points would be awarded for completion time, strategic choices, and what the judges called demonstrated grace under pressure. Marcus had trained. He was ready. He was absolutely going to embarrass himself, but he was ready. The course began, and immediately Marcus understood that everything he'd trained for was barely adequate. The automated opponents were fast, precise, and programmed with Calith combat algorithms that prioritized efficiency and elegance. He took hits that made his vision blur. He made tactical choices that were probably wrong by every Calith standard. But he kept moving, kept adapting, kept refusing to quit even when his body screamed that quitting would be so much easier. Human endurance, evolved for persistence hunting on Earth's savannas, became his unexpected advantage. Where Calith competitors relied on explosive speed and precision, Marcus simply kept going. When finesse failed, he used stubbornness. He watched Lyria complete the course through observation screens during his rest period. She moved like combat was a dance she'd memorized perfectly, every motion efficient, every choice optimal. She finished with a time that made the judges gesture approval. Marcus's turn came. He finished 12 minutes slower, took 3 times as many hits, and probably violated several aesthetic principles of Calith combat. But he finished. The judge's ruling was diplomatic. Ambassador Lyria demonstrated excellence in combat technique. Lieutenant Webb demonstrated remarkable endurance and adaptability to unfamiliar combat styles. Both competitors showed the courage the dual bond requires. In the preparation area afterward, Marcus sat with an ice pack pressed to his ribs and tried to remember if breathing was supposed to hurt this much. Lyria approached, moving with her characteristic grace despite having just completed the same brutal course. "You're injured," she observed. "I'm functional, mostly." He managed a smile. "You were amazing out there. I felt like I was watching someone who was born to fight." "I've trained since childhood. You had weeks." She sat beside him, an informal gesture that surprised him. "Your endurance was unexpected. That's humanity's superpower. We're not the fastest or the strongest, but we can keep going when everything else stops." I noticed. She was quiet for a moment. "The final challenge is in 3 days, the ritual of speaking." "I'm terrified," Marcus admitted. "At least with strategy and combat I had some idea what I was doing. Public speaking about cultural understanding. I'm going to mess it up. Perhaps you'll surprise everyone again." Her ears tilted forward. "You've surprised me several times now. Is that good or bad?" "I'm still determining that." They sat together in companionable silence, and Marcus realized that somewhere between the slap and this moment, they'd stopped being adversaries. He wasn't sure yet what they were instead, but it felt like progress. The 3 days passed too quickly. Marcus wrote and rewrote his speech for the ritual of speaking approximately 17 times. Tavin reviewed each version and told him they were all wrong. "Stop trying to say what you think they want to hear," the old scholar advised. "Say what's true. What if the truth sounds stupid? Then it sounds stupid, but at least it will be honest." The ritual took place in the Grand Assembly Hall, with both diplomatic corps present along with prominent Calith officials and observers. Marcus stood on the platform, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes watching him, and felt his carefully prepared speech evaporate from his memory. Lyria spoke first. Her words were formal, precise, and powerful. She acknowledged that she had perceived Marcus as careless because his methods were unfamiliar, that she had used criticism as a defense against her own uncertainty in cross-cultural exchange. The dual bond had forced her to confront her rigidity, to see that different approaches could be equally valid. When she finished, the assembly gestured approval in the Caliph manner, a subtle movement of ears and hands that Marcus had finally learned to recognize. Then it was his turn. He stepped forward, looked at the assembled crowd, looked at Lyria standing with perfect posture and those amber eyes fixed on him, and abandoned every word of his prepared speech. "I called Ambassador Lyria annoying," he said, his voice carrying in the acoustically perfect hall, "because she challenged me to be better and I resented it. That's the truth. I was tired, I was frustrated, and I lashed out at someone who was actually trying to help me succeed in a situation where I was completely out of my depth." He took a breath, committing fully to honesty. In human culture, we often avoid direct conflict. We smooth things over, we prioritize harmony, we tell polite lies to avoid uncomfortable conversations. When Ambassador Lyria kept pointing out my mistakes, I interpreted it as personal criticism rather than professional guidance. I was wrong about that. The dual bond forced me to confront my own defensiveness, to see that my resentment was really just fear of inadequacy. Marcus gestured to the assembled crowd. "Your people have a tradition where conflict becomes a path to understanding. That's actually brilliant. Instead of letting resentment fester, you channel it into structured challenges that reveal character. These past weeks have been uncomfortable, occasionally painful, and completely outside my cultural comfort zone. They've also taught me more about genuine communication than months of diplomatic training." He turned to face Lyria directly. "I don't know if we'll ever stop arguing. I think arguing might actually be how we communicate best. But I've learned that being challenged isn't the same as being attacked, and that someone who pushes you to improve isn't your enemy. So thank you for not accepting my apology, for making me see this through, for being exactly as exacting and demanding and, yes, occasionally annoying as you are." The silence that followed felt eternal. Then Lyria moved, her long ears tilting forward in an expression Marcus had finally learned to read. Respect. She offered him the gesture of acknowledgement, a formal Caliph sign reserved for equals who had proven themselves through trial. The assembly erupted in approval gestures, and the senior judge declared the dual bond complete and transformed into partnership. Later, in a quiet garden away from the celebration, Marcus and Lyria stood together watching Thessara Prime's twin moons rise over the capital. "Partnership," Marcus said. "What does that actually mean?" "It means we're bound as allies. We have mutual obligations of loyalty and support. In political contexts, we speak for each other." Lyria's ears tilted slightly. "It's not a casual designation. Nothing about the past few weeks has been casual." "No, it hasn't." She turned to look at him. "I never expected the human who irritated me so thoroughly to become someone I respect. I never expected to be grateful for being slapped." Marcus smiled. "But here we are." "Here we are," Lyria agreed. Then quieter, "Do you truly think arguing is how we communicate best?" "I think we're both direct people who value honesty over politeness. That's going to create friction. But maybe friction isn't always bad. Maybe it's just energy that needs somewhere to go." "That's remarkably philosophical for someone who called me annoying. I'm growing as a person. It's very painful. I don't recommend it." Lyria's ears tilted in what Marcus had learned was her version of laughter, subtle, controlled, but genuine. They walked through the garden, still debating proper diplomatic protocol, still finding things to disagree about, but now with understanding beneath the conflict. Marcus touched his cheek where she'd slapped him all those weeks ago. The sting was long gone, but the memory remained. A reminder that sometimes the most important relationships begin with confrontation, that growth often comes wrapped in discomfort, and that being challenged by someone might be the greatest gift they can offer. You know what's funny? Marcus said as they paused beside a fountain that recycled water in patterns that defied Earth physics. What? If you hadn't slapped me, I would have spent the rest of this assignment resenting you. We would have finished the negotiations, gone our separate ways, and I would have remembered you as the person who made my job miserable. And now you're the person who taught me that conflict doesn't have to be destructive. That directness is a form of respect. That sometimes the people who challenge us most are the ones helping us grow. He looked at her directly. So thank you for not letting me get away with easy resentment. Lyria's ears tilted forward. That expression he'd learned meant she was genuinely considering his words. In my culture, we have a saying, the blade that cuts you sharp is the one you should keep close. I thought humans were too soft for such philosophy. We're softer than Caliph in a lot of ways. Physically, emotionally, culturally. But soft doesn't mean weak. Sometimes being soft means being flexible enough to bend without breaking. Is that what you did? Bent without breaking? I bent. I'm still not sure about the breaking part. Marcus smiled. Ask me again after we've worked together for a few months. This partnership thing is going to test that flexibility pretty thoroughly, isn't it? Almost certainly. I'm still exacting. You're still prone to cutting corners when you think no one's watching. I prefer to think of it as efficient adaptability. I prefer to think of it as corners being cut. But there was warmth in her voice now, a teasing quality that suggested she was joking rather than criticizing. They continued walking, and Marcus found himself noticing details he'd been too stressed to appreciate before. The way Thessara Prime's architecture created pockets of peaceful space within the angular grandeur. The way the evening light caught the silver threading in Lyria's formal robes. The way her ears moved in subtle communication that he was finally learning to read. What happens now? He asked. Practically speaking, we're partners, the negotiations are concluding, and eventually I'll be reassigned. Partnership transcends location. You'll be expected to maintain contact, to support initiatives I'm involved in, to represent our bond in political contexts. Lyria paused, and I'll be expected to do the same for you. When you take your next assignment, I'll be watching to ensure you're representing yourself, and by extension me, appropriately. So basically you'll still be correcting my protocol violations, just from a distance. Precisely. I should have withdrawn from the dual bond when I had the chance. But you didn't. Her ears tilted in that subtle amusement again. Why didn't you truly? You could have avoided all of this. Marcus thought about it, trying to identify the moment when withdrawal stopped being an option in his mind. Because running away would have meant never understanding what the conflict was really about. And I've spent enough of my life avoiding uncomfortable conversations. The dual bond forced me to stay, to engage, to actually confront instead of deflecting. He looked at her. I'm better for it. I don't like that it required getting slapped and beaten up and publicly challenged, but I'm better. That's the purpose of the dual bond. Not to determine victory, but to forge both participants into stronger versions of themselves. Lyria stopped walking, turning to face him fully. I was genuinely uncertain you would complete it. Humans have a reputation for avoiding direct conflict. We do. We're good at passive aggression and polite resentment. But we're also stubborn when we commit to something. You gave me a reason to commit. By being annoying. By being challenging in ways I couldn't ignore. Marcus held her gaze. You never let me be comfortable with mediocrity. Every time I thought good enough was sufficient, you showed me it wasn't. That's actually a valuable thing even when it's frustrating. They stood in the garden's evening light. Two people from different worlds who'd found unexpected common ground through ritualized conflict and forced honesty. The human delegation is hosting a celebration tomorrow, Marcus said, for the successful conclusion of negotiations. You should come. As my partner, you're probably expected to. I'll attend, though I'll likely spend the evening correcting human diplomatic protocols. I'll spend the evening defending our efficient adaptability. It will be insufferable. Probably. But they were both smiling now, and the tension that had defined their early interactions had transformed into something else. Not quite friendship yet, but the foundation of it. Partnership, with all its obligations and complexities, but also with the promise that they'd continue challenging each other toward better versions of themselves. As they walked back toward the diplomatic quarter, Marcus's comm unit chimed with a message from Ambassador Chen. "Well done, Lieutenant. You've achieved something remarkable, a formal partnership with Kalith nobility. This will have significant implications for future human-Kalith relations. Try not to screw it up." Marcus showed the message to Lyria, who read it and made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Sound advice," she said. "Do try not to screw it up. No promises. Screwing things up is kind of my specialty." "I'm aware. That's why you have a partner now, to minimize the damage." They reached the entrance to the diplomatic residences, where their paths would diverge, Marcus to the human quarters, Lyria to the Kalith section. "Tomorrow, then," Marcus said. "At the celebration." "Tomorrow," Lyria hesitated, then added, "and Marcus, your speech at the ritual of speaking was adequate." Coming from her, that was practically effusive praise. High marks from Ambassador Shalmet. "I should document this moment. Don't let it inflate your ego. You still have approximately 900 protocol violations to correct, and you'll be there to point out every single one. Obviously." Marcus watched her walk away, her posture perfect even in informal settings, and realized he was looking forward to tomorrow's arguments about diplomatic protocol. Looking forward to having someone who would challenge him, push him, refuse to let him settle for adequate. He touched his cheek one more time, that spot where everything had changed with one sharp, precise slap. Best diplomatic incident of his career. 3 months later, Marcus received his new assignment, liaison position at the Joint Human-Kalith Research Station on the border world of Kepler 442b. The official notification included a note that partner Lyria Shalmet had specifically requested his assignment to facilitate ongoing partnership obligations. When he contacted her to ask if she'd really pulled strings to get him assigned to a border world research station, her response was perfectly Lyria. "You need supervision. The research station needs a liaison, efficient solution. You just want someone to argue with about proper research protocols. That's a secondary benefit. The primary benefit is ensuring you don't embarrass our partnership through incompetence. I'm touched by your confidence in me. You should be. I have very high standards." They continued like that, debating, challenging, pushing each other toward excellence through sheer stubborn refusal to let the other settle for less than their best. It was exhausting and frustrating and occasionally infuriating. It was also exactly what they both needed. The partnership that began with "you're so annoying," and a slap became one of the most effective human-Kalith collaborations in Concordance history. They worked together on research initiatives, cultural exchange programs, and diplomatic projects that bridged two very different civilizations. They argued constantly. They challenged each other relentlessly. They never let each other get comfortable. And in the process, they proved that sometimes the most important relationships are the ones that begin with conflict, as long as both people are brave enough to see where that conflict leads. Years later, when younger diplomats asked Marcus about the dual bond and how he'd managed to form a partnership with someone as exacting as Lyria Shalmet, his answer was always the same. "I told her she was annoying. She slapped me. Everything after that was just us figuring out that we worked better together than apart. Even when together means arguing about the correct angle for diplomatic bows. And you don't regret it, the slap, the challenges, any of it." Marcus would touch his cheek, remembering that sharp sting that had changed everything, and smile. "Not even for a second. Best mistake I ever made." Because sometimes growth comes from being challenged. Sometimes understanding comes from conflict. And sometimes the person who annoys you most is the person you need most, someone who refuses to let you be anything less than your best self, even when achieving that best self requires being uncomfortable, being pushed, being changed. The dual bond had taught him that. Lyria had taught him that. And he spent the rest of his career trying to pass that lesson forward. That directness is a form of respect, that challenge is a form of care, and that sometimes